If you like this story, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next exciting stories. And now let's enjoy the story.
Before he was nothing, Rex was everything. He had served in the most dangerous missions, his name whispered in hushed tones by men who had seen war and lived to tell about it. He had been the ghost in the night, the silent protector, the line between order and chaos. His first mission had saved 20 soldiers from walking into a death trap, sniffing out a pressure-sensitive IED buried deep in the sand, one that would have turned them all into dust. On another, he had chased down an armed cartel leader through the mountains of Colombia, leaping over jagged cliffs, dodging bullets, and bringing the man to the ground before a single shot could be fired. When a terrorist cell planted a biochemical bomb in a crowded city market, Rex was the one who found it with seconds to spare, his nose saving thousands of lives while human intelligence had failed. His final mission? The one that changed everything? A raid gone wrong. The memory burned inside him, hidden in the shadows of his mind. The gunfire, the explosion, the way his handler screamed as the bullets tore through him. And then pain, blinding, searing pain, a bullet to his side, his vision going dark. And when he woke up, everything was gone. His team, his home, his purpose. He had given everything to protect his country. And in return, they had thrown him away. The grand auction hall shimmered under golden chandeliers, the scent of wealth and power thick in the air. America's elite, businessmen, celebrities, politicians, gathered in clusters, champagne glasses in hand, speaking in hushed, smug tones. Tonight was about excess, about flaunting money in ways that made the average man sick. Exotic cars, purebred racehorses, rare art, each item paraded on stage, each one fetching sums that could feed a small town for a year. But at the center of the sand-covered arena, a single figure lay still. A German shepherd, his black and tan coat dulled with dust, his ribs barely visible under a thick layer of muscle. His ears were low, his body tense, but his eyes told a story no one in this room cared to hear. His name was Rex. Once, he had been a legend. Now he was nothing. The auctioneer, a polished man in a pressed suit, cleared his throat and straightened his papers. Lot 42, presenting Rex, a highly trained K-9 unit, formerly enlisted in federal operations. He paused, scanning the crowd. Loyalty, intelligence, combat readiness. This is not just a dog, ladies and gentlemen. This is a warrior. Silence. The audience barely reacted. A few glances, but no raised paddles. A man in a sleek black suit smirked and took a sip of his drink. I heard he was injured, a woman whispered to her husband, eyeing the dog like a worthless antique. A washed-up police dog, someone scoffed. He's probably slow now. A ripple of dismissive laughter spread through the hall. Rex lay motionless. He had heard the whispers before. Useless, broken, disposable. The auctioneer, now visibly uncomfortable, adjusted his tie and pressed on. Opening bid, $115,000. Silence. Not a single paddle went up. He tried again. Come now, ladies and gentlemen, this dog has saved lives. Surely. Nothing. A few people sighed impatiently. One man chuckled. Move on, someone muttered. The auctioneer swallowed hard. He had seen many things in this business, greed, arrogance, cruelty, but something about this felt especially cold. He took a breath. Any offers? And then, from the very back of the room, a voice rang out. $500. The entire hall erupted in laughter. Heads turned to see the bidder, a young man standing near the entrance, completely out of place in this world of luxury. His denim jacket was worn, his boots scuffed from long days of labor. His name was Jake Carter, and he had just insulted an entire room of billionaires. A woman in a glittering dress scoffed. 500? You can't even buy a bottle of wine for that. The man next to her smirked. What's next, kid? You want to bid on a Ferrari with your piggy bank? The laughter swelled, the sneers deepened. Jake didn't flinch. He just stared at Rex. The auctioneer hesitated. He scanned the crowd, waiting for any other offer. None came. With a heavy sigh, he slammed the gavel down. Sold for $500. The room roared with laughter. People shook their heads, whispering, smirking, amused at the absurdity of it all. Jake didn't care. He ignored them all and strode toward the center of the arena. He crouched beside Rex, the first person to truly look at him since the auction began. Rex lifted his head. For the first time that night, their eyes met, and something changed. For months, Rex had been tossed aside, unwanted, abandoned. A tool once sharpened to perfection, now left to rust. But this young man, this stranger, wasn't looking at him with pity. He was looking at him like he mattered. Neither of them knew it yet. But this moment, this ridiculous $500 bid was about to change everything. And soon, the whole world would be watching. The cold Montana air cut like a knife as Jake Carter stepped out of the grand auction hall, the laughter still ringing in his ears. $500, you can't even buy a bottle of wine for that. They thought it was a joke. They thought he was a joke. But Jake wasn't laughing. He glanced down at the German Shepherd walking beside him, his fur dull, his posture stiff with distrust. The dog wasn't looking at him, not really. His dark, intelligent eyes were watching everything. The streetlights, the parked cars, the shifting shadows. This was an animal trained for war, built for battle. And yet, in that auction hall, he had been treated as nothing. Discarded, just like Jake had been. They reached his truck, a rusted, beaten-down old Ford that had seen better days. Jake opened the passenger door. "Come on, buddy." The dog hesitated. For a moment, Jake thought he might refuse. The dog just stood there, unmoving, eyes locked onto his like he was calculating something. Then, slowly, Rex climbed in. Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. As he started the engine and pulled onto the road, he glanced over at his new companion. Rex sat rigid, ears twitching at every small sound, nose sniffing the cold air seeping through the cracked windows. He wasn't relaxed. He wasn't comfortable. He was waiting. For what, Jake didn't know. But something in the dog's posture made his gut tighten. The road out of town stretched into endless darkness. The neon lights of the city faded behind them, swallowed by the towering silhouettes of pine trees. Jake's ranch was an hour away, an old place built by his grandfather, forgotten by the rest of the world. It was the kind of land where no one came unless they had a reason. He exhaled and adjusted his grip on the steering wheel. "What happened to you, huh?" he muttered, half to himself, half to the dog. Rex didn't respond. Of course he didn't. But something about those eyes, those haunted, knowing eyes, made it feel like he understood everything. Jake turned his focus back to the road, but his mind was racing. He had read Rex's file, the injury, the botched mission, how his handler had died in a raid gone wrong, leaving Rex behind. That was the official story. But Jake knew better than to trust official stories. The ranch came into view, an old wooden house standing against the backdrop of snow-covered fields. The barn loomed in the distance, its doors swaying slightly in the wind. It was quiet, too quiet. Jake pulled into the driveway, killed the engine, and sat still for a moment. He wasn't alone. He felt it before he saw it. A shift in the air, a presence. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. Slowly, he turned his head toward Rex. The dog was already staring out the window, completely still. Then, his ears twitched, his breathing slowed, his entire body went rigid. Jake exhaled and reached under his seat, pulling out a loaded revolver. He opened the truck door without making a sound. The cold hit him instantly, biting, ruthless. Rex jumped down beside him, his movements silent, his posture alert. Jake scanned the property. The barn, the fence, the tree line, nothing. Just the wind, the creak of old wood. But then, a shadow shifted. Jake's grip tightened around the gun. Something or someone was out there, and they were watching. The porch light flickered as Jake stepped onto the wooden steps. He wasn't the paranoid type, but living alone in Montana teaches you a few things. 1. If something feels wrong, it is. 2. If a dog like Rex is acting like something's out there, you better believe him. Jake reached for the doorknob, but before he could turn it, a sharp crack echoed from the barn. His blood ran cold. Rex growled, a low, lethal sound deep in his chest. His muscles tensed, his ears pricked forward. Jake turned, his eyes locked onto the dark shape by the barn door. A figure, tall, watching, unmoving. For a moment, neither of them moved. Jake's finger hovered over the trigger. But then, the figure disappeared into the darkness. Jake's heart pounded. He knew what he saw. Someone had been standing there. Someone had been waiting. Rex let out another growl, his eyes fixed on the barn. Jake exhaled slowly. "Not tonight," he muttered, backing toward the house. He wasn't going to chase shadows, not yet. He opened the door and Rex walked in first, still on high alert. Jake locked it behind them, but he didn't put the gun down. The house was silent, except for the crackling fireplace. Rex paced the living room, sniffing the air. Jake sat at the kitchen table, his hands clenched around a glass of whiskey. Something wasn't right. He pulled out his laptop, typed in a name. The name on Rex's auction papers. Signed Victor Reynolds. His stomach dropped. Because the first result wasn't about a decorated officer, it was an obituary. Victor Reynolds had been murdered, shot execution style during a raid, and Rex had been there. Jake's breath shallowed. Someone had tried to erase every trace of that night. Someone had made sure Rex ended up discarded. And now they were coming to finish the job. Jake closed the laptop, his pulse hammering. He glanced at Rex, still pacing, still restless. And then, scratch, scratch. Jake's head snapped toward the door, a pause. Then, scratch, scratch. His fingers curled around the gun. Someone was out there, and they wanted him to know it. Rex let out a deep, warning growl. Jake stood slowly. He walked toward the door, pulse hammering, and pressed his eye to the peephole. Nothing. But he wasn't fooled. He unlocked the deadbolt, pulled the door open in one swift motion, and froze. Because on the porch, placed neatly in the center of the welcome mat, was a single bullet. A message. Jake's jaw tightened. He picked it up, turning it between his fingers. He knew what this meant. They weren't coming. They were already here. The bullet felt heavy in Jake's hand, far heavier than a single round should. It wasn't just metal. It was a message. A warning. Someone had been here. Close enough to leave this on his doorstep. Close enough to kill him. Behind him, Rex's low, guttural growl filled the silence. The dog's body was tense, ears pinned forward, his dark eyes locked onto the open door as if daring someone, anyone, to make a move. Jake's pulse hammered, but his mind was already working. This wasn't a random break-in. This was personal. He stepped onto the porch, scanning the shadows stretching across the ranch. The barn, the fence line, the tree line, all potential places for a shooter to hide. But there was nothing, just the wind. Just the quiet that shouldn't have been quiet. He turned the bullet over between his fingers. It was an unspent round, .45 caliber. A common type, but it wasn't the caliber that made his blood run cold. It was the scratched engraving on the casing. VR Victor Reynolds. Jake exhaled sharply. He'd seen this before, years ago, back when he was still in the military. Cartels, black ops, corrupt agencies. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was a reminder that Victor Reynolds was dead, and that Jake was next. Jake shut the door behind him and locked it, all 3 deadbolts. Rex didn't move from his spot by the door, his muscles still tensed, his breathing slow and measured. The dog was waiting, anticipating. Jake sat at the kitchen table staring at the bullet. He picked up his phone and dialed the one person he knew would give him the truth. Sheriff Tom Grayson. The line rang twice before Grayson answered, his voice gruff with sleep. Carter? You do realize it's 2 in the damn morning? Jake didn't waste time. I need to know everything about Victor Reynolds' death. The real story. Silence. Then Grayson sighed. Why the hell are you asking about Reynolds now? Jake's grip on the bullet tightened. Because someone just left me a .45 round with his initials carved into the casing. Another silence. Longer this time. Then, lock your doors. I'm coming over. Grayson's truck pulled up 20 minutes later, headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. The sheriff stepped out, boots crunching on the gravel, hand already resting on the pistol at his hip. Jake met him on the porch holding up the bullet. Recognize this? Grayson took one look and muttered a curse under his breath. Son of a bitch. Jake's jaw clenched. Start talking. Grayson rubbed his face, exhaling hard. Reynolds wasn't just killed in a bad raid, Carter. He was executed. Jake's blood ran cold. He already knew it, but hearing it confirmed, that changed everything. Executed by who? Grayson shook his head. I don't know, but here's what I do know. Reynolds was working on something bigger than just a cartel bust. He had found something that got him killed. Jake glanced down at Rex, who was still standing like a statue, listening. And the only witness, Jake muttered, Grayson nodded, was his dog. The pieces clicked into place. That's why they wanted Rex gone. Not because he was a liability, but because he knew something. Something they couldn't afford to let anyone uncover. Jake's stomach twisted. Rex didn't just escape that night. He survived a murder. And now, whoever had killed Reynolds, they were coming to erase the last loose end. The words had barely left Grayson's mouth when Rex's ears shot up. His body went rigid. A split second later, the ranch's power cut out. Darkness swallowed everything. Jake didn't think. He moved. He grabbed Grayson by the collar and yanked him inside just as glass shattered. Gunfire ripped through the living room. Bullets tore into the walls, the furniture, the windows. Jake hit the ground, rolling behind the kitchen island. Grayson dove behind the couch, pulling his pistol free. Rex was already moving. Jake caught a flash of fur as the dog launched toward the broken window, disappearing into the darkness like a ghost. "Rex, no!" Jake yelled. But it was too late. Rex was hunting. Jake's pulse pounded in his ears. He peeked over the countertop, gripping his revolver. A silhouette stood outside, tall, masked, rifle raised. Jake fired first. The shot missed by an inch. The figure ducked, disappearing into the shadows. Then a scream, not human. Animalistic, painful. Jake knew exactly what had happened. Rex had found his target. Jake pushed up from cover, bolted to the door, and sprinted outside. He found one of the masked attackers writhing in the snow, screaming, because Rex had his jaws locked around the man's forearm, crushing bone. Another attacker, bigger, faster, was raising his weapon. Jake didn't hesitate. He aimed. Fired. The second man collapsed, groaning, blood staining the snow. Rex growled, tightening his grip on the first man. Jake stepped forward, gun raised. "You move, you die." The man gasped in pain, staring at him with wild, terrified eyes. "You have no idea what you just stepped into." Jake's grip on the revolver tightened. "Then why don't you tell me?" A pause, then the man smirked. "You're already dead." A loud thump. A flashbang detonated. Blinding white light, deafening sound. Jake stumbled back, eyes burning. By the time his vision cleared, both men were gone. Rex stood beside him, snarling, teeth bared, fur bristling. Jake exhaled, trying to steady his pulse. Then he turned to Grayson, who was staring at him like he just stepped into a war zone. "Still think this is just a cartel hit?" Jake muttered. Grayson shook his head. "No, this is bigger, much bigger." Jake clenched his jaw. Whoever was after Rex, they weren't done. And now neither was he. "Then it's time we find them first." The night air was thick with tension, the cold Montana wind cutting through the ranch like a knife. The attack had failed, but the message had been delivered. They weren't just being watched anymore, they were being hunted. Jake Carter had faced enemies before. He had been in operations where silence meant survival, where the wrong move cost lives. But this was different. This wasn't a battlefield. This was his home, and they had brought the fight to his doorstep. Sheriff Grayson paced the living room, rubbing a hand down his face. The place was a mess. Shattered glass, bullet holes, overturned furniture. "This ain't just some random cartel cleanup," he muttered. "Whoever's behind this wants something buried so deep, they're willing to burn down half the damn valley to do it." Jake stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the tree line. Rex sat at his feet, still as a statue. Grayson sighed. "Carter, we gotta be smart about this. You and that dog, you're walking targets now." Jake's grip tightened around the spent bullet casing still in his hand. "Then we do what they don't expect." Grayson raised a brow. "And what's that?" Jake's eyes were cold, calculated. "We stop running, and we start hunting." Jake knew exactly where to start. Victor Reynolds' case had been buried, but someone had left breadcrumbs. The bullet with Reynolds' initials wasn't just a warning, it was a breadcrumb. A trail, deliberately left behind. Jake drove to town before dawn, parking outside the one place that held the answers no one wanted to talk about. The old storage facility on the edge of town had once belonged to a retired DEA agent. Now it was just another forgotten building, collecting dust. But Jake had done his research. This was where Reynolds had stored his personal case files. If there was a piece of the truth left untouched, it was here. Rex was the first to sense it. The dogs stiffened, ears pricking forward as they approached the rusted-out storage unit. Jake could feel it too, the weight of something watching them, not someone. Something left behind. With a slow exhale, he unlocked the unit and pushed the door open. The place smelled of dust and old paper, the air stale and unmoving. The single light bulb flickered, casting long shadows across the concrete walls. Jake's gaze swept the space. Stacks of old files. A rusted desk, a filing cabinet with the lock half broken, and a single brown envelope sitting in the middle of the desk. Jake's gut tightened. Someone had been here, and they had left this for him. Jake lifted the envelope carefully. No name, no return address, just 2 words stamped on the front. For him. His pulse picked up. Him? Who the hell was him? He opened the envelope, pulling out a single Polaroid. His blood ran cold. It was a photo of Rex, taken 2 nights ago. In the corner, a message had been scrawled in thick, jagged ink. He remembers. Do you? Jake's hands clenched. The message wasn't just cryptic, it was a taunt. Someone knew what Rex had seen, and now they were daring Jake to figure it out. Rex let out a low, uneasy whine. Jake ran a hand down the dog's head, grounding himself. He wasn't alone in this. And neither was Rex. Sheriff Grayson's truck pulled up to the storage lot minutes later. He stepped out, eyeing the Polaroid in Jake's hand. Hell of a way to make a threat. Jake exhaled. This isn't a threat, Sheriff. It's an invitation. Grayson's expression hardened. To what? Jake turned the photo over. There was another set of handwriting on the back. A date, a time, a location. They want to meet. Grayson stared at him. And you think that's a good idea? Jake glanced down at Rex, whose golden eyes were locked onto the photo like he knew exactly what it meant. Jake's voice was steady. I think it's the only way we get the truth. Grayson cursed under his breath. You sure about this, Carter? Could be a setup. Jake smirked slightly. I'm counting on it. Because whoever was pulling the strings, whoever was orchestrating this, they thought they were leading Jake into a trap. They had no idea they were stepping into his. The Montana wind howled through the valley as the truck rolled down an empty dirt road, the headlights carving out a narrow tunnel of visibility. The location on the back of the Polaroid led to an abandoned gas station on the outskirts of town. Jake drove in silence, his hands gripping the wheel with purpose. Rex sat in the passenger seat, his ears twitching, golden eyes locked onto the horizon. Sheriff Grayson sat in the back, shotgun resting on his lap. This still feels like a damn trap. Jake smirked. That's because it is. Grayson let out a slow breath. And we're walking straight into it? Jake's expression didn't change. No, we're walking them into it. Jake wasn't a fool. He had spent years working operations where walking into a setup was the only way to get close enough to burn it down from the inside. This was no different. The gas station was a ghost of the past. Rusted fuel pumps, shattered windows, and a sign that barely clung to its rusted hinges. Jake killed the engine and took in the scene. No cars. Grayson scanned the lot. Doesn't mean they're not here. Jake reached into his jacket, pulling out the envelope. He turned it over in his hands before dropping it on the dash. A challenge had been issued. Now it was time to answer it. He stepped out of the truck. Rex followed immediately, his body low and controlled. Grayson groaned. This is a terrible idea. But he got out anyway, shotgun ready. The silence was unnatural. Jake had expected someone to be waiting, a shadow leaning against the wall, a figure stepping out from the darkness. Instead, nothing. But Rex sensed something. The German Shepherd moved with precision, his nose twitching as he scanned the area. Then his body stiffened. His ears shot up. Jake followed his gaze. Something was hidden behind the pumps. He motioned to Grayson. The sheriff lifted his shotgun and stepped forward, circling around to flank whatever was waiting for them. Then, a rustling noise. Jake's heartbeat pounded in his ears. Then Rex growled. A deep, guttural sound. Something wasn't right. Jake rounded the gas pumps and froze. No people, no vehicles, just another Polaroid, pinned to the rusted metal. Jake grabbed it, flipping it over. It wasn't a picture of Rex this time. It was a picture of Jake, taken less than an hour ago. Someone had been watching them. Jake's blood ran cold. Grayson stepped closer. Tell me that's not what I think it is. Jake clenched his jaw. It's worse. He turned the photo over. Another message, scrawled in thick black ink. You're too late. Check your back door. Jake didn't even think. He ran. Jake slammed into the truck's door, shoving the keys into the ignition with shaking hands. Rex jumped in beside him, sensing the urgency. Grayson barely had time to climb in before Jake gunned it down the road. His hands were white-knuckled on the wheel. His ranch was nearly 10 miles away. Too late for what? His mind raced through the possibilities. Had they torched the place? Had they taken something? No. His gut twisted. Had they been after Rex, or had they been after something else? Then a thought hit him like a freight train. Samantha. Grayson's head snapped up. What? Jake's sister. She was supposed to check in this morning. She hadn't. And now Jake pushed the truck harder. The engine roared as he tore down the highway, dirt kicking up behind them. This wasn't just a warning anymore. It was personal. By the time Jake's truck skidded to a stop in front of the ranch, the front door was wide open. Jake didn't wait for Grayson. He didn't even wait for Rex. He ran. His boots pounded against the wooden porch. Inside, the place was a mess. Chairs overturned, papers scattered, a broken lamp. Jake's stomach twisted. "Sam!" His voice echoed through the house. Nothing. He rushed into the kitchen, empty. Then Rex barked. Jake turned so fast his boots skidded against the hardwood. The back door, slightly open. Rex's fur bristled as he lowered his body, ready for something Jake couldn't see. Jake stepped closer, his breath sharp. He pushed the door open fully and froze. There, on the back porch, taped to the wooden railing, a single piece of paper. Jake's hands trembled as he ripped it free. 4 words, "She's alive, for now," and below it, a location, a meeting point, a time, and one final message scrawled in black ink. "Come alone, bring the dog." The wind howled through the Montana night, carrying a chill that seeped deep into Jake's bones. He stood on the back porch, gripping the piece of paper with knuckles white from pressure. "She's alive, for now." The words burned into his mind, fueling a rage so deep it nearly blinded him. Behind him, Rex stood tense, his golden eyes locked onto the paper as if he, too, understood the gravity of the situation. Sheriff Grayson stood beside them, shotgun still in hand, his jaw clenched. "This is bad." Jake didn't answer. His mind was already calculating. The location listed on the note was an old hunting cabin, a place he knew well. It was isolated, deep in the woods and far from prying eyes, perfect for an ambush. The time listed? 1 hour from now. Jake exhaled sharply. This wasn't just a kidnapping. This was a challenge. They didn't just want him. They wanted Rex. Jake stormed inside, heading straight for the gun cabinet. His hands moved with mechanical precision, loading a sidearm and grabbing extra magazines. Grayson followed him, arms crossed. "We need to call in backup." Jake shook his head. "No time." "Damn it, Carter. You can't just walk into this alone." Jake slammed the cabinet shut. "I'm not walking in alone." His eyes flicked to Rex. The German shepherd sat, waiting, watching. There was no hesitation in his body, only raw, focused determination. Grayson sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You really trust that dog to back you up in a fight?" Jake turned, leveling him with a stare. "I trust Rex more than I trust most people." Grayson exhaled through his nose. "Fine, then let's make sure we even the odds." Jake grabbed a second radio from the drawer, tossing it to Grayson. "You follow behind. Give me 5 minutes to get inside. If anything goes sideways, you move in." Grayson caught the radio with a nod. "And if this is a trap?" Jake's lips curled into a dangerous smirk. "Then we spring it." He looked down at Rex. "Ready, boy?" Rex's ears perked, his body shifting with anticipation. He was born ready. The old hunting cabin was a 40-minute drive through winding forest roads. Jake gripped the wheel, his mind a storm of thoughts. Was Samantha hurt? Who were these people? And more importantly, why did they want Rex? The pieces were starting to fit together, but the full picture was still just out of reach. One thing was clear: whoever these people were, they had miscalculated. Because they thought Jake Campbell was just a rancher. They had no idea who he used to be. And that was their first mistake. The headlights cut through the darkness as Jake pulled up to the cabin. It was as silent as the grave. No movement, no cars. But that didn't mean no one was inside. Jake killed the engine and exhaled, steadying himself. He turned to Rex. "We do this quiet." Rex's tail gave a small, deliberate wag, the kind that meant he understood. Jake pulled his gun, sliding out of the truck. His boots barely made a sound as he stepped onto the dirt. The porch creaked under his weight. Then, a voice from the darkness. "You came alone. Good." Jake froze. The voice was deep, calm, controlled. A figure stepped out from the shadows. Jake's grip on his gun tightened. The man was tall, built like a soldier, with a scar running down his left cheek, and he was holding a radio. A direct link to whoever was inside with Samantha. "Hand over the dog," the man said, his tone flat, emotionless. Jake's blood boiled. "Not happening." The man sighed, shaking his head. "Then this is going to be messy." He pressed the button on the radio. A click. Then Samantha's scream cut through the night. Jake's entire world went red. Rex snarled, his body tensing like a coiled spring. Jake's heartbeat thundered in his ears, and then all hell broke loose. The moment Samantha's scream ripped through the night, Jake moved. There was no hesitation, no fear, just pure instinct. Rex surged forward alongside him, a shadow in the darkness, silent, deadly, controlled. The scarred man barely had time to register the movement before Jake's fist connected with his jaw. Crack. The impact sent the man staggering backward, his radio clattering to the ground. But Jake wasn't done. Not even close. He grabbed the man's collar and slammed him into the porch railing, pinning him like a trapped animal. "Where is she?" Jake's voice was a snarl, his fingers digging into the man's throat. The man choked, gasping for air, but managed to smirk. "You're too late." Jake's knuckles tightened, his blood roaring in his ears. Then, a low growl. Jake glanced down. Rex was inches from the man's leg, his teeth bared, golden eyes burning with a warning. Jake let go just enough for the man to gasp. "Start talking." The man coughed, spitting blood onto the dirt. "You think she's still here?" His smirk widened. "We moved her an hour ago." Jake's stomach dropped. Rage flashed through him, hot and violent. They moved her. Which meant this wasn't just a trap. This was a message. They never planned on making a trade. They just wanted to see how far Jake would go. They wanted Rex, and they were still watching. Jake barely controlled his breathing as he scanned the darkness. Someone was still out there, watching, waiting. The scarred man let out a dark chuckle. "You feel it, don't you? The eyes, the pressure?" Jake ignored him. Instead, he lifted the man by his collar, dragging him toward the truck. The man resisted, but Rex was right there, watching, waiting, ready to pounce. "You're coming with me," Jake growled, "and you're going to tell me exactly where they took her." The man scoffed. "You won't make it in time." Jake stopped. A deadly calm settled over his face. "That's the difference between you and me. I don't wait for time. I take it." Then he threw the man into the back of the truck. Grayson's headlights cut through the darkness as his truck rumbled onto the property. He took one look at the bloodied man in Jake's truck bed and let out a sigh. "Jesus, Carter, you work fast." Jake didn't answer. He was already strapping the man's wrists with industrial zip ties. Grayson crossed his arms. "Let me guess, he's not cooperating?" Jake slammed the tailgate shut. "Not yet." The sheriff studied Jake for a long moment. "You're in deep now, son." Jake's jaw tightened. "They have my sister." Grayson exhaled. "I know. That's why I called in help." Jake turned sharply. "What do you mean?" A second set of headlights appeared down the road. The tires crunched over gravel as a black SUV pulled up next to them. The door opened and out stepped a woman in tactical gear, her dark hair tied back, her presence sharp as a blade. "Lena Vasquez, FBI." Jake narrowed his eyes. "Why is the FBI here?" Lena stepped forward, her gaze flicking to Rex before landing on Jake. "Because this isn't just a kidnapping." She handed him a file. Jake flipped it open and his stomach dropped. Surveillance photos. Not just of him. Not just of Samantha. But of Rex. Dozens of photos from months ago. They had been watching all along. Lena's voice was cold, sharp. "You need to know the truth, Carter." Jake clenched his fists. "Then start talking." Lena exhaled. "Rex isn't just a retired military dog." She glanced down at the German Shepherd, her expression dark. He was part of a classified program. A program designed to create the perfect canine unit, one capable of detecting and neutralizing threats before they happen. Jake frowned. "Neutralizing? You mean?" Lena nodded. "These dogs weren't just trained to detect danger, they were trained to eliminate it." Jake felt his breath catch. "And that's why they want him?" Lena hesitated. "Not just him. All of them." Jake froze. "All of them?" Lena's jaw tightened. Rex wasn't the only one. Jake sat on the tailgate, trying to process everything. Rex wasn't just a dog. He was a weapon. And now, the people who created him wanted him back. Or worse, they wanted him gone. Lena crossed her arms. "We think there are at least 3 other dogs from the program still unaccounted for." Jake stared at Rex, who sat beside him, his golden eyes locked onto him with quiet intensity. Rex had always been more than just a dog. Now Jake understood why. Grayson cleared his throat. "And Carter's sister? Where does she fit into this?" Lena's expression darkened. "She's leverage." Jake's blood turned to ice. Of course, they weren't after money, they weren't after revenge, they were after control. Jake exhaled. "So we go after them. We take the fight to them before they get a chance to use her against us." Lena hesitated. "You don't understand who you're dealing with. These people aren't just cartel thugs or rogue operatives." She leaned in, her voice low. "This is deeper than anything you've ever faced." Jake's response was immediate. "Then we dig deeper." Rex let out a low growl, his tail stiff. Lena sighed. "You're not gonna let this go, are you?" Jake locked eyes with her. "They took my sister. They tried to take my dog, and they think I'm gonna sit back and let it happen?" He shook his head. They just made the biggest mistake of their lives. A beat of silence. Then Lena smirked. "All right, cowboy, let's get to work." The wind howled through the Montana Valley, whipping against the side of the truck as Jake clenched the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Time was slipping away. Beside him, Lena Vasquez tapped furiously on her laptop, scanning satellite images of abandoned compounds, cartel warehouses, and suspected black sites. Sheriff Grayson sat in the back, his shotgun resting across his lap. And in the rear seat, Rex sat, rigid and alert, his golden eyes burning with an eerie sense of knowing. They weren't just searching for Samantha now. They were hunting the people who had built Rex into what he was. The people who had taken his sister as leverage. The people who thought they could break him. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Lena's voice broke through the silence. "Found something." Jake glanced at her. She turned her laptop toward him, showing a thermal scan of a remote airstrip deep in cartel territory. Small buildings surrounded it, with 4 large heat signatures, SUVs idling in the cold night, and one of them, according to intercepted radio chatter, was carrying Samantha. Jake's pulse pounded in his ears. "How far?" Lena's jaw tightened. 2 hours, maybe less if we push it. Grayson exhaled, checking his shotgun. "If we go in hot, we'll be outnumbered. No backup, no guarantees." Jake's grip on the wheel tightened. "We're not waiting." "No, we're not," Lena agreed. "But if we do this, we need an advantage." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Seconds later, a map loaded onto the screen. Jake's heart stopped. It wasn't just a cartel airstrip. It was a holding facility. And not just for drugs. Lena zoomed in on the building blueprints. "These cages aren't for people." Jake swallowed hard. "They're for dogs." Rex let out a deep, low growl. Jake turned to Lena, his voice cold. "How many?" Lena hesitated. "We don't know, but if Rex was part of this, there's a good chance there are others." Jake looked back at his canine partner, the dog who had been by his side through everything. If there were other dogs like Rex, trapped, broken, waiting to be discarded, or worse, this mission wasn't just about Samantha anymore. This was about bringing them all home. The airstrip loomed in the distance, barely visible through the fog rolling in over the valley. Jake killed the headlights and rolled to a stop a mile out, cutting the engine. "We walk from here," he said, checking his gear. Lena secured a suppressed pistol to her belt. "This place is too well guarded for a frontal assault." Grayson nodded. "So we go in quiet, find Sam, and get the hell out." Jake reached into the back seat, running a hand down Rex's thick fur. "Not just Sam." Lena exhaled. "You really think there are other dogs here?" Jake's jaw clenched. "I know it." Rex nudged his hand, eyes burning with purpose. Jake turned to the others. "We do this fast, we do this quiet, and if they give us a reason," he checked his sidearm, "we make sure they never do it again." Lena and Grayson exchanged a glance. Then they nodded. The hunt was on. They moved like ghosts through the trees, the distant hum of cartel trucks masking their approach. Lena took the lead, scanning the perimeter with night vision goggles. 2 guards by the main entrance, another on the roof. Jake's pulse slowed, calculated, focused. "We take them one by one." Grayson moved first, stepping behind a guard and knocking him out with a brutal elbow strike to the temple. Lena took the rooftop sentry with a clean, silenced shot. Jake crept forward, his knife flashing as he disabled the last guard, catching the body before it hit the ground. The entrance was clear. They were in. The stench hit them first. Blood, urine, decay. Jake's gut tightened. Rows of cages lined the walls of the warehouse, each one housing a dog, German shepherds, Belgian Malinois, even a few Rottweilers. Most were too weak to move. Jake clenched his fists. They were training them, testing them, then throwing them away. A whimper echoed through the room. Jake's head snapped toward the farthest cage. His breath caught. It was a puppy. Small, malnourished, terrified, and chained. Rex moved first. The older K9 pressed his nose to the cage, letting out a soft, rumbling whine. Jake swallowed hard. These weren't just dogs, these were survivors, and they weren't leaving them behind. "Grayson, get the bolt cutters. Now." Footsteps. Jake's head snapped up. Guards. They had seconds before the entire compound was alerted. Lena pressed against the wall, gripping her weapon. "We need to move. Now." Jake spotted a metal staircase leading to the second level. A locked door, a single scream. Sam. Jake didn't wait. He bolted up the stairs, Rex at his side. The lock snapped under a well-placed shot. The door flew open, and there she was. Samantha. Tied to a chair, her face bruised but her eyes fierce. The moment she saw Jake, tears flooded her eyes. Jake. He rushed to her, cutting the restraints as Rex stood guard, teeth bared. Samantha clung to him, her breath shaking. They were waiting for you. For Rex, they were going to. The sound of gunfire erupted below. Grayson's voice crackled through the radio. We're made. We've got to go. Now. Jake pulled Samantha to her feet. Stay close. Rex snapped his jaws, standing in front of her protectively. No one was taking her again. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Guards swarmed from every direction as Jake and the others fought their way out. Lena's pistol flashed in the dark. Grayson's shotgun roared. And Rex was a force of nature. One guard reached for Samantha. Rex lunged. Teeth sank into flesh, a scream, a crash, a body hitting the floor. Jake barely looked back. They burst into the cold Montana night, racing toward the truck. Engines roared behind them. Pursuit. Jake threw open the door, shoving Samantha inside. Rex leapt in after her. Lena and Grayson piled in. Jake slammed the gas pedal and the truck exploded forward. This wasn't over. Not yet. But now? Now they had Samantha. Now they had the proof. And now the people behind this, they weren't hunting anymore. They were being hunted. The wind howled through the Montana Valley, carrying the scent of pine and the cold bite of the coming winter. The battlefield was silent now, littered with shattered vehicles and the remains of the cartel's last desperate attempt to hunt them down. Jake stood in the center of it all, his heart hammering in his chest. They had won this fight. But the war wasn't over. Grayson crouched over the unconscious cartel leader, securing his wrists with a zip tie. Lena kept her rifle trained on the man's men, the few survivors who had surrendered rather than face Rex's wrath. Jake knelt beside the cartel leader and gripped his jaw, forcing him to look up. Tell me who's running this operation, Jake growled. Tell me why they wanted Rex. The man spat blood onto the dirt. You're in over your head, Carter. You think you stopped something? You have no idea what's coming. Jake's patience snapped. He grabbed the radio he had stolen off the man and pressed the button. Whoever's listening, let me make this clear. Iron Ridge isn't your playground anymore. You come back here and we'll bury you. Silence. Then, Equithrough, a voice crackled through. You have no idea what you just started, Mr. Carter. Enjoy your victory. It won't last. A slow, sickening smile spread across the cartel leader's face. Jake's blood ran cold. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The cartel men were left tied up by the wreckage. Sheriff Grayson had called in federal reinforcements to clean up the mess. Lena wiped sweat from her brow, exhaustion clear in her eyes. We bought ourselves time, but this won't end here. Jake stared at the rising sun over the valley. No, it won't. Samantha stepped forward, her arms wrapped around herself. What do we do now? Jake looked at Rex. The German shepherd had been trained for war, beaten, betrayed, and nearly broken. But he had survived. And now, so would they. We go home, Jake said, and when they come back, we'll be ready. Weeks later, life in Iron Ridge had begun to settle. Sheriff Grayson cleaned up the last of the cartel's remnants in Montana. Lena stayed in town, keeping a close eye on any cartel movement. And Jake rebuilt. Samantha had found her own peace, choosing to stay in Iron Ridge rather than run again. As for Rex, the dog who had been rejected, hunted, and almost turned into a weapon, he lay beside Jake's chair on the porch, his ears twitching at every sound, his dark eyes scanning the horizon, ever the protector. Jake ran a hand over his fur. We made it, boy. Rex thumped his tail once. The war wasn't over, but together, they would face whatever came next. And this time, Iron Ridge was ready.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please support me by clicking the logo in the bottom right corner to subscribe to my channel. This way, you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up. Thank you so much.